He is still subject to bias while serving as the UFC president. Furthermore, you can count on Dana White to be upfront about how he feels about a fight with everyone. As usual, please let us know if you enjoyed the video by hitting the like button and subscribing so that we can make sure you don't miss anything. And now, without further ado, and ranked in no particular order, here are 10 fights that pissed off Dana White. Anderson Silva vs Demian and Maia. And what better way to kick things off than with one of the most infamously disappointing title fights in UFC history. Not only was this bout the headliner of an important card for the UFC on pay-per-view, but this event was also crucial in their attempts to corner the Middle Eastern market, their first official show in Abu Dhabi since the dawn of the Zuffa era. All was going according to plan, and all that remained was for the fights themselves to deliver. Unfortunately, the main event pairing between Anderson Silva and Demian Maia for the middleweight title was, well, a very strange and quite underwhelming contest. Silva obviously had respect for Maia's elite grappling, but as the bout wore on, the champion's antics basically ruined any amount of competitive tension as he tipped it around any real head-on collisions. In the post-fight, Dana White slammed Silva for his performance publicly, even calling the main event an embarrassment. Francis Ngannou's Derrik Lewis. Speaking of boring fights, Dana had already soared on Francis Ngannou following his one-sided loss to Stipe Miocic at UFC 220. But when the Predator attempted to make a comeback at UFC 226, things got even worse. Facing off against the hard-handed Derrik Lewis, this bout was pointed to as a collision of two insanely powerful punchers. With that much power on the table, one of these guys was eventually going to hit the canvas, right? Well, not exactly. Unfortunately, practically nothing happened for the vast majority of the scheduled 3 rounds, and when all was said and done, Lewis was the one to somehow get the decision victory. Dana pretty much gave Lewis a free pass though, due to his back injury, and instead went off on Francis Ngannou, taking shots at his overblown ego and his handling of Fiend. Chuck Liddell's Tito Ortiz. Chuck Liddell was a phenomenal champion and a good friend to Dana during his time at the top of the sport. Tito Ortiz, on the other hand, despite once being quite close to the UFC president, is now among his biggest enemies, and a guy that Dana is always happy to take shots at if the opportunity presents itself. So, when Tito and Dana White's other nemesis, Oscar de la Hoya, announced that they were bringing Chuck Liddell out of retirement 8 years after his last fight to be served up on a platter for the much younger and in-shape Ortiz, Dana was obviously not happy. And when Tito went out there and TK'd the Iceman, and then proceeded to celebrate like he had just won UFC gold, yeah, this one was very easy to hate on. Tyron Woodley vs Darren Till. Sometimes, Dana White just isn't a fan of the champion. Other times, he just gets dollar signs in his eyes when a bright new contender finally breaks through. UFC 228's headline match of Tyron Woodley vs Darren Till combined these two scenarios into one. Woodley was carving out an impressive reign atop the 170-pound division, but he wasn't exactly thrilling audiences. Darren Till was the young, brash, marketable prospect who had broken into the top 5 ahead of UFC 228, and it seemed like the promotion were well and truly behind him. But on fight night, Woodley proved a bridge too far, and after knocking Till down in the second round, he locked up a Darce choke and forced the tap, and you could just see how unimpressed Dana White was with the fact that Woodley was still on top. It didn't take long for him to start shots at the champion in the media once again. Tyron Woodley vs Demian Maia. So why did Dana White dislike Tyron Woodley so much? Well, if we were to try and take on the UFC president's perspective, well, on the one hand, you've had his constant complaining and on the other, you've had performances like the ones he turned in against Stephen Thompson and Demian and Maia. Highly tactical, but undeniably effective 5-rounders that saw the chosen one deal with 2 incredibly unique matchups. But when Woodley was finished stuffing takedown after takedown from Maia at UFC 214, Dana had nothing but harsh criticism for him in his output title defense. What really is there to talk about in that fight? When you get booed out of an arena, it means people don't want to watch you fight. Some might have seen it as a champion adequately overcoming a very tough matchup. But when Woodley was finished stuffing takedown after takedown from Maia at UFC 214, Dana had nothing but harsh criticism for him and his output title defense. What really is there to talk about in that fight? When you get booed out of an arena, it means people don't want to watch you fight. Some might have seen it as a champion adequately overcoming a very tough matchup. Dana was definitely embarrassed by the welterweight king on this night. Israel Adesanya vs Yoel Romero. Look, when you're fighting a genetic freak like Yoel Romero, you gotta manage your risk levels. But when Israel Adesanya decided to specifically call out Romero just so he could add this highly feared and avoided fighter's name to his resume, fans had every right to expect fireworks. Why else would Izzy specifically call out Yoel Romero when he was coming off a loss? Well, as it turned out, Adesanya had no intention of fighting fire with fire. And instead, we were presented with one of the most boring title fights in UFC history. The last title bender took home the win, but the fight was so low output that it could have frankly gone either way. Safe to say Adesanya lost himself quite a few fans on this night, and Dana White could not help but be embarrassed by the low-quality main event he had so fiercely hyped up beforehand. Dennis Hallman's Brian Ebersol. This next one's pretty simple. Dennis Hallman's Brian Ebersol was not a fight that is relevant in the MMA history book, save for one particular reason. Hallman decided to walk to the octagon and fight wearing a pair of Speedos. This was, of course, before the Reebok and later Venom deals, but even still, this choice of fight kit really did stand it out, and Dana was quick to blast Hallman after the fight, calling his choice disgusting. The fighter himself would later admit that he lost a bet, and that's why he did what he did, but the damage was already done. St Pierre's Johnny Hendrick. Even if you're one of the all-time greats of the sport, that doesn't mean that you're safe from Dana's wrath. And for St Pierre, a closely fought matchup against Johnny Hendricks left the world thinking that the great GSP had finally been dethroned. But in the end, the decision went his way. However, that wasn't the problem. No, the issue as it relates to Dana came when St Pierre announced his retirement from the sport, effectively leaving the division without its champion and cheapening the belt in the fans' eyes, given that he never officially lost. And to say that Dana was not happy would be putting it lightly. Instead of giving one of the mightiest champions a nice send-off, White turned on him in the post-fight press conference, slamming St Pierre for walking away after a performance like that. Blachowicz was Magomed. Draws are an incredibly rare sight in the sport of mixed martial arts. And while from time to time seeing a stalemate in some lower prelim fight is to be expected, a draw in a title fight is not usually the best outcome. And when a title fight just so happens to be for a vacant championship belt, that's where things get truly messy. Jan Blachowicz and Magomed were tasked with bringing the 205-pound division into a new era in the absence of its injured champion, Yuri Prohaska. But after 5 thoroughly disappointing rounds, Dana White was left totally furious at the lack of drive from these competitors. And the fact that it was ruled a draw left him in a uniquely awkward spot. Instead of running the fight back and trying again, White was so angry that he basically ruled both men out in the post-fight interview, giving Jamal Hill and Glover Teixeira the next shot at the belt instead. Valentina Shevchenko's Priscilla Cachoeira. And finally, we come to the bout that basically ruined the career of Mario Yamasaki. Valentina Shevchenko was always going to be a handful at 125 pounds, but setting her up for a fight with Priscilla Cachoeira was never a good idea. In reality, it was a total mismatch, and Valentina proved that on many levels, dominating Cachoeira from start to finish while doling out an insane amount of punishment. In fact, she landed 217 strikes to Priscilla's one. And when Yamasaki was asked why he didn't stop, he was told that he wanted to give the underdog a chance to be a warrior. Needless to say, this infuriated Dana White. He said that he was allowing Priscilla to be a warrior. What do you think about that statement? Mario hasn't worked at a UFC event since. And hey, if you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to let us know by giving it a like and hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. As always, thanks for watching.